What's up, everybody? I'm David Yakir with Stephanie Raffelock for Yak About Today, hoping you are better, healthier, and more informed than any generation that came before. So if the years 46 to 64 mean something to you, then this is the place you want to be. So put your headphones on, go for a run, and listen to what we yak about today. So, David here. To all our Yak About Today radio and podcast listeners, in the coming weeks, my new partner, Stephanie Raffelock, and I will be putting our two podcasts together into one, titled, you guessed it, Yak About Today, with a nice little subtitle, 46 to 64, The Years That Made Today. So Stephanie is an author, a speaker, an oft-requested guest in podcast land, and I can't tell you how much I look forward to working with her. But for now, after the break, is episode 2 of 4664, The Years That Made Today. Hey guys, I want to talk about New Vision Eye Center. You know, I often tell you that the show is sponsored by New Vision Eye Center, but what you don't know is that I've been a patient and under the care of New Vision Eye Center for the last 4 years. And I can tell you honestly, what sets them apart wasn't just that they are great doctors. It was the way the doctors and staff cared for me that made the difference. So take my word for it and go see Dr. Minotti, Reinauer Tate O'Brien, and the rest of the New Vision Eye Center team, because I wouldn't trust my eyes to anyone else.
I am so glad that you joined us as we explore yesterday and today with the stories that connect us. Okay, David, what are you looking at today? What's current?
Okay, so bear with me for a while. So what I was going to do is talk about the demonstrations, the protests, and how they relate to the ones that took place in the 60s. But something started happening recently, and I got to get it off my chest. So you're going to help me with this. And it's the fact that even my neighbors who are in our age group are now pretending life is going on as usual. You know, they're going to restaurants, they're having their hair done. And what's interesting is their perspective is that now that everything's open, we can go about our business. When everybody is telling us that nothing's changed. The coronavirus, COVID-19, is there. You're just as susceptible as you ever were. You know, it's all around us. And I'm sitting there trying to get this through my head. Are we okay because as long as we put on masks, keep our distance, you know, go to places where they keep us 6 feet apart, is that really protecting us while everything's open? Or are we just fooling ourselves because the economy really does come first and we'll just have to bear with the repercussions? So, you know, even though I wasn't going to do that now, you know, it just really sort of got to me because I was just in a conversation where they were telling me, some of my neighbors were going, you really need to try out this new restaurant down in Fort Pierce that we tried. And in my head, I'm going, you know, maybe I'm being, you know, a little, you know, too safe-minded, you know. So I don't know how it is where you are in Austin and what the mentality is, but I don't know. I don't know.
You know, I think it's a divided thing here in Austin. Some people are out doing things wearing masks. Some people are not. I'm like you. I tend to look for that middle ground. I'm not ready to go to a bar or a restaurant or a concert or an event where there's like lots and lots of people. My book group, which is 12 women, 12 lovely women in Austin, made the decision that we were going to continue doing Zoom calls. And the reason for that is that we have some women that are my age and a little bit older, and they want to keep seeing their grandkids. So we're still taking precautions. And it's all we've got are the precautions. Right. We don't know what will happen in the next few weeks as far as, are there more cases from people being out protesting? Are there more cases because so much has opened up and we're shoulder to shoulder in certain situations? We don't know the answer to that. And all we've got are the basics of keep washing your hands, don't touch your face, wear a mask, not because it protects you, but because it's a courtesy to your neighbor that if you somehow got exposed, you're not going to spread it through your droplets.
Right.
So the 6 feet distancing, I have 2 friends that I am breaking that with, that I walk with. And like me, they're not going a lot of places. I'm still living in a bubble. My world is small. It's the grocery store. It's Home Depot. I did get my hair cut last week. That was kind of a thrill. After your little piece on hair, it's like I had to do something. So I don't think anybody has the answers, but I do suggest caution and a wait and see approach. And I think that the opening of the country, it's not going to happen overnight. The economy isn't going to happen overnight. And let's just take it slow and make it steady and wait and see what happens.
All makes sense. All right. For the more serious topic, again, it's something I find bewildering. The demonstrations and the protests that are taking place, which, one man who had a knee on his neck who died as a result of probably, a policeman that does not represent most police, or a cop that doesn't represent most cops, right, started a worldwide phenomenon. And it's interesting because you look back in history and it seems to give you an idea of what's happening. So if you look back into the mid-'60s, and I think some of the things I'm talking about happened in the year that we're going to discuss later, but, you had that March on Washington, 200,000 people, and you had Martin Luther King giving the I Had a Dream. There was a big civil rights movement. Things changed. And sort of things seem to have gotten better. But I'm not sure I understand why 50 years later we're still in the same boat. There's still so much racism. And by the way, there's unintended racism when you talk to liberal-minded people, right? And they still talk the way they talk about me being gay. I have a gay friend. I have a black friend. So there's an underlying racism even within good people because they still see, and this always blows my mind, they still see the color of a skin as different. And I always joke, I understand what you mean, right? I can't stand blondes, right? I only like brunettes, and it seems ridiculous, I'm sitting, so, I can't look at a blonde, and God forbid a brunette kisses a blonde, I can't take that, what kind of children are they going to have, that type of thing. So I'm trying to make sense. Is this a major set of major events that are happening, right? Or does this go by the wind, blow away?
Well, I think revolution is always strongest on the edges that push it forward. And so this revolution, of course, it remains to be seen how that comes about. But one of the things that I note is different is when there were the great protests in 1968 in front of the DNC, those were pretty much a bunch of white privileged kids.
Right.
Who had broken away from college to go do this protest. Now, did they have a message? Absolutely, had a message. But what is so different about today is that these protests are worldwide and the protesters are diverse. And here's what I love about the diversity. We've never reached the saturation of diversity where we really got a chance to immerse ourselves in forgiveness. Now, I know my generation didn't bring the slaves over here, right? So what do I have to ask forgiveness for? But yet there is such tremendous power in forgiveness. And if you ever read the Desmond Tutu book, No Future Without Forgiveness, the premise of that was that when apartheid ended, you couldn't do reparations. The country wasn't rich enough to do things. So they did these like forgiveness tribunals where people got to talk about like what it felt like. And right now, I think the conversation that's happening out on the streets is that Black people for the first time are being heard when they say, this is what it's been like for us every day. We are afraid to go out of our homes. We are afraid of being hunted. And I think for the first time, walking with them hand in hand, we're going, wow, I've never had to live my life like that. My parents didn't have the conversation with me that said, this is what you have to do if you get stopped by a cop. Because you don't get arrested for driving while white, but you can get arrested for driving while Black. And like you said, it's not all police.
No.
It's some. But man, this guy, I look at his death, George Floyd, and the horrible tragedy that was, and I think it was like it was his life's purpose to die like this. God, I hope that doesn't sound cold, because he changed the world.
Isn't that what the word martyr means? You know?
Yeah, a true martyr. And, you know, God bless him. We should all give thanks for what this man sacrificed to make us wake up.
That's right.
And hear our brothers and sisters. And you're right. It doesn't, the color of your skin, come on, get over it and find some forgiveness in your heart that says we are connected. Our hearts are the same. It doesn't matter. None of it matters. Love is what connects us. It doesn't matter about color.
One last question, then we'll go into our year. Right? Does change come out of this?
I believe that it does.
Okay.
I'm ever the Pollyanna optimist. I believe that it does.
Okay. So when we come back, 1963.
Don't talk back.
All right, Stephanie. So we picked 1963. And do you want to go first on this? Or do you want me to hit it?
Go ahead, hit it.
Okay. So I was coming at it in two ways. And one way, obviously, is it was such a big year also, much like 1969 in many ways, because it did have the death of President Kennedy, which was sort of the defining moment sort of toward the end of the year. We did lose a pope. As we were talking about before, we had the Martin Luther King "I Had a Dream" speech, which is why I brought it up earlier. And, we had the Beatles took over the world in music, all that. But when I was thinking about it, I really thought about it in more personal terms. And maybe I'll do this in a few minutes. I really did look back. Who was I? Where was I? And there was one thing that struck me that really defines the upbringing, the year, and that is I grew up in Brooklyn on a pretty major street, buses going back and forth, garbage trucks, traffic, in a 7-story brick building. And we were on the second floor. And in those days, we hung out the window. And we talked to our friends. They'd walk by, right? And, I'd be hanging out the window, and somebody else would be talking to their friend, and somebody would yell, "Shut up, Davey Yakka," that type of thing. And I go, "Shut up," and we're all hanging out the window. And sometimes during the day, the women, while the men were working, actually took their lawn chairs and would sit outside the front of the building, that type of thing. And I remember having my transistor radio, my first radio, that I became obsessed with radio. It was a 6-transistor radio. Sort of the design was a turquoise blue deco design. And I had it with me with one little earplug. And while I was hanging out the window, I would listen to all that music. The Beatles, "I Want to Hold Your Hand," Little Peggy March, "I Will Follow Him," right? While I was talking out the window. And at night, we didn't have air conditioning, so all the windows were open, and everybody was hanging out the window just to get a breeze. And I just remember vividly that year. I knew that year because of the music and because Kennedy was killed. And I knew where I was, And so when we picked this year, it wasn't so much about the events as it gave me, I actually meditated on this. Where was I? What did it feel like? What was the weather like? That type of thing. So I thought I'd share a little upbringing with you.
So, David, how old were you in 1963?
13.
13. Okay. In 1963, I was 11 years old.
Right.
And of course, those two impactful events, the assassination of a president, which was pretty hard to wrap my head around at the age of 11, but the Beatles were the doorway into my love for music.
Yes.
And of course, I wasn't hanging out the windows, but I was sure hanging out with my girlfriends in Denver, Colorado. And we were talking about which Beatle we would marry. I was going to marry Paul McCartney.
Right.
So that's what I remember about 1963 and that, that kind of preteen double-digit phase where you start to define the music of your youth.
It's so funny when you said, this is so funny, when you said you picked Paul McCartney. So in school, I had a girl friend, and she was sitting next to me, and all the girls had picked out, they had favorite Beatles, and McCartney was the prettiest of the Beatles.
Yes.
So he was sort of the most popular, right? And I remember one conversation, and I turned around to her and I said, "Who is your Beatle?" And she turned around and she goes, "I'm taking Ringo." I said, "Ringo? Why?" And she said, "He's the only one available." So, yeah, I thought that was the funniest thing I ever heard, because everybody else was picking, picked Paul, John, and some picked George, obviously, but Ringo, because nobody else had him. So I thought that was really hysterical.
Don't talk back.
All right, we are back. Anyway, so this is the segment where we each take a turn and talk about what we've been thinking about. And last week I talked about my hair, which shows just how deep, I think. And today, Stephanie, you're going to tell us what you've been thinking.
Here's what I've been thinking. I put my dog down last Monday. It was a personal loss in the middle of so much collective loss that I wasn't even sure what to do with it. And that's what life is like right now. There are none of us that are exempt from the personal losses of our day-to-day life, whether it's job loss or a dog you put down, a close relative that's sick. But somehow those events are dwarfed in their importance by the current events of the day, the pandemic, the civil unrest. So what gets us through? I feel kind of lonely and isolated. I only have a couple of friends that I see in person. And yet it's my friends that have gotten me through this personal tragedy. That and the practice of gratitude. I have gratitude for what was with my sweet dog. And his name was Jeter, by the way. Yes, named after the great
Derek
Yankee
Jeter.
shortstop.
Got it?
That's right. Derek Jeter. I'm grateful for what was with Jeter. I'm grateful for what is now, that in spite of everything that's swirling on around me, I'm in a warm home, some days a cool home. I've got enough to eat. I have a few close friends. And I'm grateful for what will be, because I believe in the transformative force of grace and the transformative force of grief. It's our collective heart. It's our collective love. It's the fact that we share loss. We know what loss is. We know what surviving loss is. And that's what inspires me to navigate the personal grief right now. So to that end, I'll say it again, grief is the great transformative force. And the work at hand is to nourish our personal hearts and the hearts of others through love, compassion, and gratitude. That's what I'm thinking.
All right. We're coming to the
All right.
end.
All right. Well, I have to say, you have been a good friend to me this last week. You've checked in several times about my dog, and I appreciate that. And as always, I enjoy talking with you, and I'm so happy to have you as my friend. And listeners, I'm so glad that you joined us today. All right, David, Tell me something good. Let's end it on an upbeat note.
I think it goes to where we started. You see, I firmly believe that what's happening now will change our lives in the future. And I think it's the combination, actually. I think it's the combination of the coronavirus, which gives us some perspective. It's going to force us to rethink our existence to begin with, how we do things, our institutions. And also, the demonstrations, I think, are really going to work. I don't think they're going to be fly-by-night. I think there are changes coming out of that. And it's interesting. I guess it's the half full, half empty type of thing. Like, I believe that goodness is going to come out of all of this. Some people I talk to saying everything's falling apart, but I believe, and I would end it on this note, that there's something great that's going to come out of the combination of this.
I'm with you.
All right. So that's it. Next week.
Take out the papers and the trash, or you don't get...
Once again, if you are listening to us via radio and the show is cut off before the end, go to yakabouttoday.com where you can listen to the show in its entirety or any place you get your podcast. And remember, if you are new here and listening to one of the podcast networks that carry us, consider subscribing. And remember, you can write to us at david@yakabouttoday.com. That's david@yakabouttoday.com. Or follow us on Facebook or Twitter @yakabouttoday. So until next time, this is David Yakir, and we'll yak with you next week. Same time, same place. Peace.
Take out the papers and the trash, or you don't get no spending cash. If you don't scrub that kitchen floor, you ain't gonna rock and roll no more. Yakety yak!
Don't talk back.
Just finished cleaning up your room. Let's see that dust fly with that broom. Get all that garbage out of sight, or you don't go out Friday night.
Don't talk back.
You just put on your coat and hat and walk yourself to the laundromat. And when you finish doing that, bring in the dog and put out the cat. Yakety yak!
Don't talk back.